The dry wind whipped across the plains, stirring the dust that clung to Wade Cross's boots as he urged his weary stallion onward. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Far ahead, the faint outline of Copper Creek shimmered under the late afternoon sun, a place he hadn't seen in 8 long years. 8 years of drifting from ranch to ranch, from one cattle drive to the next, trying to outrun the ghosts that now pulled him back home. Folded against his chest, a telegram pressed like a brand mother, gravely ill. Come home. Hank Dobbs. He'd gotten it 3 days too late. It was 1878, and Copper Creek, once a rough frontier camp, had changed. Fresh paint gleamed on new storefronts, wagons lined the main street, and where a rickety platform used to be a full railroad station now stood. Wade reined in his horse outside the general store, his muscles stiff from 4 days in the saddle. The scent of pine from the mountains mixed with the smells of dust, sweat, and cooking fires, home and heartache all at once. Well, out became a voice from across the street. If it ain't Wade Cross back from the dead. Wade turned and found Jed Crow, the town blacksmith, stepping out of his shop, wiping soot and sweat off his hands with a ragged leather apron. The man's once dark beard had gone gray, and deep lines cut through his sunburned face. Not dead, Jed Wade said, with a tired smirk as he dismounted. Just gone a while? Jed's tone softened. Heard about your ma. The funeral's set for tomorrow. Town folks have taken care of things best we can. He studied Wade for a moment, then added quietly, You look rough, son. Wade just nodded. Words felt too fragile to trust his voice with. He'd left Copper Creek at 22, angry proud, and too restless for his own good. Now at 30, he came home with nothing but trail dust, worn leather, and the bitter knowledge he was too late to say goodbye. Your ma's place is still standin', Jed said, adjusting his hat. Doc Dobbs been looking in on it. I'll head out there, Wade said, taking the reins again. Appreciate the welcome. Jed placed a hand on his shoulder. Town's changed some. Maybe you'll want to, too. The Cross homestead sat a mile beyond the edge of town, a small cabin and barn his father Harlan Boone had built by hand a quarter-century ago. As Wade rode up the familiar dirt path, time seemed to fold back on itself. The old oak tree still stood guard beside the porch, though it looked smaller now. The steps sagged, the barn roof needed patching, but it was still home. He stabled his horse, fed, and watered it, then reached behind the rain barrel for the cabin key. It was still hanging from the same rusted nail. Inside, the air smelled of dust and loneliness. Someone had kept it clean. There was kindling in the hearth, swept floors, and his mother's rocker by the window. Wade moved through the rooms, fingers brushing over pieces of another life. The quilt his mother, Mary Beth Dobbs, had sewn his father's worn Bible, the shelf of old books once treasured. In her room, her hairbrush still held strands of silver hair. That small detail broke him. He sank to the edge of the bed, hands pressed to his face, breath shaking. He had written her letters, sure, but not enough. Never enough. He'd ignored her pleas to come home, too proud, too angry. His father's death from pneumonia had hardened him against this place, against Dr. Hank Dobbs, who couldn't save him, and against the God his mother had loved so fiercely. And now both were gone. Only regret remained. A soft knock startled him. He straightened, wiped his eyes, and opened the door. A woman stood on the porch, someone he didn't know. She was in her late 20s, perhaps dressed in a simple but well-made blue dress. Her chestnut hair was tied neatly at the nape of her neck, and her hazel eyes held a warmth that immediately unsettled him. "You must be Wade," she said, her voice low and kind. "I'm Ruby Lane, Hank Dobbs's daughter," he asked, his voice rough from dust and emotion. She nodded. "My father sent me to bring supper and make sure the cabin was in order." She hesitated before adding softly, "I'm truly sorry about your mother. She was remarkable." Wade stepped aside, gesturing her in. "Thank you. Please come in." Ruby moved through the doorway with quiet grace, setting her covered basket on the table. "I brought stew, fresh bread, and pie. Your mother taught me to make this apple pie, though I doubt it'll taste half as good as hers." Wade watched her unpack the meal, his throat tightening. "You knew her well," Ruby smiled faintly. "I came to Copper Creek 5 years ago, after my husband passed. Your mother was the first to welcome me. She helped me through more than she ever knew." Wade's heart twisted with shame. While this woman had shared grief with his mother, he'd been miles away, clinging to old anger like a badge. "I wish I'd been here," he said quietly. "She understood why you weren't." Ruby said, her eyes gentle. "She never stopped talking about you. Her brave son working the big ranches, seeing the world. She kept every letter you ever sent." "Not enough of them," he muttered. "No parent expects perfection. Mr. Cross, just love." She knelt to light the fire. The flames sprang to life, spreading a soft, amber glow through the cabin. "There," she said, dusting her hands. "That should take the chill off the night." "The funeral's at 11 tomorrow," she added, turning toward the door. "I'll let you get some rest." "Thank you," Wade said, feeling a strange reluctance to see her go. Her calm steadiness reminded him of his mother, of something pure and familiar. "Your mother was kind to me when I needed it most," Ruby said, pausing at the door. "I'm just returning the favor." Then she was gone, leaving behind the faint scent of apple pie and wood smoke, and a warmth Wade hadn't felt in years. The whole town would gather come morning. Everyone in Copper Creek had known Mary Beth Dobbs, and nearly all had loved her. After Ruby Lane left, Wade Cross sat alone at the table, the stew she'd brought still steaming in front of him. It was rich, hearty, made by someone who cared. Each bite seemed to weigh heavier than the last. Tomorrow he'd lay his mother to rest. And then what he had no plan, no direction, just the emptiness that comes when there's nothing left to run from. The dawn broke clear and golden, the kind of autumn day his mother would have smiled at. Wade shaved, dressed in his cleanest shirt, and tightened the black string tie he'd bought in Denver on the way home. By mid-morning, the small white church overflowed. Folks stood along the walls and even out on the steps, hats in their hands. Wade sat in the front pew, painfully aware of the empty space beside him, where Harlan Boone, his father, should have been. Pastor Whitlow spoke gently about Mary Beth's faith and the goodness she'd sown in the town. She nursed the sick, comforted the grieving, and never turned away a stranger, he said. And she never stopped believing her boy would find his way home. Wade kept his eyes forward, his jaw tight, his heart pounding like thunder under his vest. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of Ruby Lane sitting near the back beside her father, Hank Dobbs. Her gaze met his just for a moment, steady, kind, and without pity. After the final hymn, the crowd followed the slow procession to the hilltop cemetery overlooking Copper Creek. Wade stood stiff as the coffin was lowered beside his father's grave, the thud of dirt on the wood cutting through him like a blade. One by one, townsfolk came forward, offering stories and sympathy. "She sat up with my Mary 3 nights when the fever near took her," said Agnes Crow, her wrinkled face wet with tears. "Brought me meals for weeks after I busted my leg at old Clyde May, leaning hard on his cane. Taught my girls their letters whispered Alina Hart, voice trembling. said every child deserves stories. Wade listened, nodded, thanked them, shame burning in his chest. He'd known so little of what his mother had done these past years, too busy holding on to his bitterness to see the woman she'd become. When the crowd thinned, Hank Dobbs approached a tall man with kind eyes and a calm dignity that came with years of carrying others' burdens. "Wade," he said, offering his hand. "Good to see you, though. I wish it were under better circumstances." Wade shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for the telegram, Doc. Just wish I'd gotten here sooner." The doctor's tone softened. Her heart had been weak for a while. The end came quick, she didn't suffer. Wade's throat tightened. Was she alone? Before the doctor could answer, Ruby stepped forward. "No," she said quietly. "I was with her. She talked about you, said she knew you'd come home when it was time." Wade swallowed hard, forcing down the ache in his chest. "Thank you for being there." Hank cleared his throat, giving them both a respectful nod. "There are a few things to settle about your mother's estate. Stop by the office tomorrow when you can. I will." Wade said, his eyes drawn again to Ruby. Something in her gaze steadied him, like a hand reaching out through the storm. "Will you be staying here in Copper Creek?" she asked softly. He hesitated. "I don't know yet. Haven't figured that far." Hank placed a hand on his shoulder. "No need to rush. The house is yours now. Take some time to breathe." When everyone had gone, Wade stood alone by the twin graves, the sun warm on his back. For the first time in years, he didn't fight the grief. He let the tears come quiet, unrestrained for all he'd lost and all he'd wasted. The next morning, Wade made his way into town. The Copper Creek he remembered was gone, replaced by painted storefronts, children laughing outside the schoolhouse, and women gossiping under the eaves. The town had grown up without him. He stopped at the white clapboard house with green shutters, the home and office of Dr. Hank Dobbs. He knocked, and the door opened to reveal Ruby dressed neatly in a brown skirt and crisp white blouse, her hair pinned up again. "Good morning, Mr. Cross," she said with a polite smile. "Come in. My father's expecting you." Inside the office smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee. Shelves of medical books lined the walls, jars and instruments neatly arranged. Hank looked up from behind his desk. "Ah, Wade," he greeted, motioning to a chair. "Sit down, son." Wade removed his hat and took a seat. "Your mother left everything in good order," Hank said, sorting through a few papers. "The house and land are free and clear. There's a bit of money in the bank. Ruby can fill you in on that." He slid a document across the desk. "Sign here, and it's official." As Wade scrawled his name, Hank added, "She also left you something, a letter. Ruby's kept it safe." Ruby opened a drawer and pulled out an envelope, her expression gentle as she handed it over. His name was written in his mother's familiar, looping hand. "I'll let you read it in peace," Hank said, standing. "Ruby can answer any other questions. I've got patients to see." Once the doctor was gone, the room felt quieter, smaller somehow. Wade stared at the envelope for a long time, before Ruby's soft voice broke the silence. "Would you like some coffee?" she asked. He looked up, meeting her kind eyes. "Yes, thank you." She poured from a pot kept warm on the stove and handed him a cup before taking her father's chair across from him. The scent of strong coffee filled the room, a small comfort in a world that suddenly felt too big and too empty. "Your mother kept things in perfect order," Ruby Lane said softly, her voice calm but touched with affection. "She came to us about a year ago to settle her affairs, though none of us believed the time would come so soon." She paused, letting the weight of it hang between them. "Life has a cruel way of surprising us." Wade Cross slid the letter into his coat pocket, his thumb brushing against the worn paper. "You've worked with your father long?" he asked. "Since the day I arrived in Copper Creek," Ruby replied. "I trained as a nurse back in Chicago before I married. When Tay died, there wasn't much left for me there. So I came west to help my father keep his practice alive." "I'm sorry," Wade said quietly. Ruby nodded, her expression composed but distant. "It was 5 years ago, an influenza outbreak. We'd only been married 2 years. There was something unspoken in her tone, a grief tucked neatly away. Wade sensed it, but didn't press. "And you've been here since he asked?" "Yes," she said, taking a slow sip of her coffee. "The town needed a healer, and I needed a reason to keep moving forward. Your mother understood that. She found her purpose again after your father passed. I'm starting to understand that now," Wade murmured, his eyes low. Ruby set down her cup, folding her hands together. "There's about $300 in your mother's account. Not a fortune, but enough to give you time to think, to decide what comes next." "Thank you," Wade said, draining his cup. "You've done more than enough already." Ruby rose with him. "Mr. Cross, if you need anything, supplies, directions, help with the property, please ask. Folks here look out for each other." Wade smiled faintly as he reached for his hat. "I appreciate that, Mrs." she interrupted with a small, teasing grin. "Miss, actually. Or Ruby, if you prefer. Everyone here just calls me Ruby." "Ruby it is, then," he said, surprised at how easily her name felt on his tongue. Something about her calm steadiness, the quiet fire behind her eyes, made him want to stay and keep talking. But he had a letter to face, a letter from the woman who'd raised him and forgiven him long before he'd earned it. He tipped his hat. "Thank you again." Back at the cabin, Wade lit a fire, the crackle of kindling filling the silence. He sat in his father's old chair, unfolded the letter, and stared at his mother's shaky but familiar handwriting. "My dearest Wade," it began. "If you're reading this, I've gone to join your father. Please don't carry guilt for being away. I understood your need to find your own road. A mother wants nothing more than for her child to seek happiness. After your father's death, I found mine again, serving this town, helping others. In giving, I found healing. I hope wherever your travels have taken you, you've found a bit of peace too. The house is yours now. Keep it, sell it, do what feels right. But Wade, I hope you'll stay a while. Copper Creek isn't what it used to be. There are good people here, ones who would welcome you if you let them. Know this, your father never blamed you for that argument before he died. Neither of you were at your best that day, but he loved you until his last breath. So do I. Live fully, love deeply, and don't let the past chain you. That's all a mother could ever want for her son. With all my love." Mother Wade folded the letter, carefully pressing it to his chest before slipping it back into the envelope. Her words stripped away the bitterness he'd carried for years. He remembered that final fight with Harlan Boone, his own restless pride, his father's stubbornness. 3 days later, pneumonia had taken Harlan before Wade could make things right. That guilt had driven him to keep wandering, chasing the next ranch, the next sunrise, anything but forgiveness. Now, sitting in the warm glow of the fire, he finally felt it, the peace his mother had left behind for him to find. By dawn, he was already outside, sleeves rolled up, hammer in hand. The barn wall needed new boards. The corral fence sagged, and a leak in the cabin roof dripped onto the floor. Hard work steadied him, it always had. By noon, sweat soaked through his shirt, but the ache in his chest had eased. Then came the sound of wagon wheels on gravel. He straightened, wiping his hands on his trousers. A small buggy turned into the yard, and Ruby Lane climbed down, reins in hand, sunlight catching in her chestnut hair. "Afternoon," she called. "Hope I'm not intruding." Not at all, Wade said, leaning against the fence. Didn't expect company, though. She smiled a soft, genuine smile that reached her eyes. I brought some supplies. Thought you might not have had time to get into town yet. Coffee flour bacon, a few jars of preserves. That's mighty kind of you, Wade said, moving to help her unload. Come inside. I can offer you, well, whatever you just brought. Ruby laughed a bright, easy sound that broke through the stillness. I brought coffee, and I baked fresh bread this morning. That'll do just fine. Inside, Wade stoked the fire while Ruby arranged the supplies neatly on the shelves. You've been working hard, she said, noticing the mended furniture and swept floor. Helps me think, Wade replied. Ruby nodded knowingly. Have you decided how long you'll stay? He poured water into the kettle and set it on the stove. Not sure yet. There's a lot to fix things Ma couldn't keep up with alone. I owe her that much. Ruby was quiet a moment, then said softly, She talked about you often. She was proud. Wade smiled faintly. Her letter said as much. I just wish I'd been a better son. Ruby's voice softened, but her words were firm. We all carry regrets, but they make poor traveling companions, Wade. Best to leave them behind and move forward. Her honesty struck him like a truth he'd long avoided. He looked at her, seeing not just kindness, but strength. Someone who'd also known loss, and kept going anyway. And for the first time in a long while, he found himself wanting to stay just a little longer. You speak like someone who's lived it, Ruby Lane said, meeting Wade Cross's gaze without flinching. When my husband died, I drowned myself in guilt. I was a nurse. I thought I should have seen the signs, done more, saved him somehow. Her voice softened, the memory still raw beneath her calm. It took me a long time to accept that some things are beyond our hands. Your mother helped me see that. She helped plenty of folks, it seems, Wade said quietly. Ruby nodded. After your father passed, she poured her sorrow into helping others. Folks came to her for everything: advice, food, comfort. She once told me that healing other people's hearts was the surest way to mend your own. The coffee began to hiss on the stove, and Wade rose to tend it, thankful for the distraction. Her words struck deep, stirring the uneasy thought that maybe his years on the trail hadn't been healing at all, just running. They sat at the small table, steam curling from their cups, the fire throwing long shadows across the room. Wade watched Ruby as she tore a piece of bread, curiosity tugging at him. How'd you end up here in Copper Creek? He asked. Not exactly a place most folks from Chicago would come looking for. My father wrote to me, Ruby said, smiling faintly. He needed help. The town was growing and he couldn't handle the patients alone. After Tay died, I didn't have much reason to stay. Chicago was full of memories I didn't want to live with anymore. You found what you were looking for here? Wade asked. Not right away, she admitted. I was angry at God, at fate, at myself. I stopped believing I had anything left to give. Her eyes softened with recollection. Your mother wouldn't let me stay in that pit. She kept showing up, bringing food, asking for help with neighbors, reminding me that I still had purpose. She was relentless. Yeah, Wade said with a small laugh. She could be stubborn. Ruby chuckled. She once told me you got that from her. That sounds like her all right, Wade said, smiling, feeling for the first time in years like she wasn't so far away. They talked long after the coffee cooled, Ruby sharing stories about the town's changes, Wade telling her bits of his life, on the trail, the ranches he'd worked, the storms he'd ridden through. It was the first real conversation he'd had in months, and it felt surprisingly easy. When Ruby rose to leave, she hesitated at the door. There's a harvest social at the church this Saturday, she said. Everyone will be there. You should come. Wade blinked, caught off guard. I'm not much for socials these days. I figured as much, she said lightly, no judgment in her tone. But if you change your mind, it starts at 6. She climbed into her buggy reins in hand. And Wade, your mother would have been proud seeing you fix up this place. As her wagon rolled away down the dirt road, Wade stood watching until she disappeared beyond the trees. Something had shifted inside him, small, but certain. He'd spent so long wrapped in silence, shutting out the world. But Ruby's quiet honesty had cracked through that shell. The next few days passed in steady rhythm. Wade threw himself into the work, replacing warped boards on the porch, patching the roof, clearing weeds from the old garden. Every nail driven, every repaired corner felt like a promise kept to Mary Beth Dobbs, a way of saying he saw now all that she'd done to hold this place together. In town, he restocked supplies, spoke briefly with familiar faces, and listened to strangers share stories of his mother's kindness. Agnes Crow told him about the meals Mary Beth had delivered through snowstorms. Clyde May mentioned how she'd sat up with his wife when the fever hit. Alina Hart recalled how she'd taught her children to read. Copper Creek had changed a new hotel, a milliner's shop, even a small printing office. But the spirit of the town was the same hard-working people surviving on grit and each other's goodwill. By Saturday evening, Wade stood in front of the mirror in his small bedroom, combing his unruly dark hair into something that might pass as decent. He told himself he was only going to thank folks for their kindness after his mother's death. But deep down he knew better. He wanted to see Ruby. The church hall was alive with music and laughter. Cornstalks, pumpkins, and baskets of apples lined the walls. Lanterns glowed like captured fireflies, and the scent of cinnamon pie filled the air. Wade paused at the door, feeling out of place among the polished boots and laughter. "You came," came a voice beside him. He turned. Ruby stood there in a rust-colored dress that caught the lantern light and made her eyes look like amber. Her hair, loose in soft curls, brushed her shoulders. "I figured I could use a break from hammering and patching roofs," Wade said, trying not to stare. "I'm glad you did," she replied with a warm smile. "Come on, I'll introduce you around. There are plenty of new faces since you left." She guided him through the crowd with easy grace, introducing him to townsfolk he didn't know. He met the new schoolteacher, the hotel owner, a couple of ranch families who'd settled in the valley. "Wade Cross." As I live and breathe, a familiar voice rang out. He turned to see Evelyn Hart, a childhood friend, with the same mischievous spark in her eyes. "Evelyn," he said, laughing. "It's been years." "8, at least," she replied. "And look at you, still too handsome for your own good." She gestured to the man beside her. "This is my husband, Eli Boone." "Eli, this rascal once put a frog in my lunch pail." Eli chuckled, shaking Wade's hand. "She's still not over it. I'd deny it if I thought it'd help my reputation," Wade joked. As they chatted, Wade caught sight of Ruby across the room speaking with her father, Hank Dobbs. For a moment her eyes found his, and she smiled a small, knowing smile that lingered before she turned back to her conversation. The evening carried on with laughter, music, and the hum of voices. Wade found himself pulled into the rhythm of the town again, sharing stories, shaking hands, thanking folks for their kindness. Later, as he ladled a cup of punch, Ruby appeared at his side. "You're fitting in nicely," she teased. "Half the single women here are already asking about you." Only half, Wade grinned. "Guess I'm getting rusty." Ruby laughed, the sound light and genuine, and for the first time in years, Wade felt something he hadn't known he'd lost belonging. "The other half are just too shy to ask, Ruby Lane?" teased her hazel eyes glimmering under the lantern light. "But don't think for the second they aren't watching you all the same." "And what about you, Miss Lane?" Wade Cross asked, surprising even himself with the boldness in his tone. "Are you watching me too?" A faint blush colored her cheeks. "I observe everyone, Mr. Cross. Comes with being a nurse." Then maybe you ought to put your observations to the test, Wade said, setting down his cup. Would you care to dance? Or does your profession forbid participation? Ruby laughed softly, a musical sound that turned heads nearby. I suppose one dance wouldn't compromise my objectivity. As Wade led her onto the dance floor, the world seemed to fall away. Her hand was warm and small in his, her movements graceful, the faint scent of lavender drifting between them. The fiddles struck up a slow waltz, and they began to move hesitant at first, then finding a rhythm as natural as breathing. You dance well for a cowboy, Ruby said with a teasing grin. My mother insisted I learn, Wade replied. Said no son of hers was going to stomp around like a bear with sore paws. Ruby laughed again. That sounds just like Mary Beth Dobbs. As they turned across the floor, Wade found himself studying her face in the lamplight. The quiet strength in her eyes, the faint scar near her temple, the sure way she held herself. She wasn't the kind of woman he used to chase no-painted beauty from a saloon, but there was something deeper there, something steady and true, that drew him like a campfire on a cold night. You're staring, Mr. Cross, she said softly. Wade, he corrected. And yes, I guess I am. Forgive me. There's nothing to forgive, Ruby murmured. Though I do wonder what it is you see. He thought for a moment, his voice low. A woman who's known pain but didn't let it break her. That's rarer than gold out here. Ruby's eyes softened. We all carry our burdens, Wade. The trick is to keep walking with them and not let them own us. The song ended, and Wade reluctantly let go of her hand. Before he could speak again, Agnes Crow appeared flustered and worried. Miss Lane, could you come quick? Little Tommy ate too much pie and his stomach's turned something fierce. Ruby smiled apologetically. Duty calls? Thank you for the dance, Wade said, tipping his hat. And thank you for asking, she replied, before hurrying off her skirts, swishing through the crowd. He stood there for a long moment, feeling something stir inside him, a strange mix of warmth and longing he hadn't felt in years. Somehow Ruby Lane had slipped past the walls he'd built around himself. The evening rolled on, filled with laughter music and conversation. Wade tried to mingle, even danced once or twice with other partners, but his eyes kept finding Ruby moving through the crowd, calm and purposeful, that same quiet smile on her lips. She danced with others too, the young banker Jed Crow's son, but she never seemed to smile at them quite the way she had with him. When the lanterns burned low and people began to drift home, Wade found himself walking beside Ruby and her father down the quiet main street. The night was cool. The stars spread wide across the sky. It was a fine evening, Hank Dobbs said contentedly. Good to see the town come together again. Yeah, Wade replied. I'd forgotten how much I missed this kind of thing. Community's everything out here, Hank said. Outlaws, winters, Indians, they're not what break a man. It's loneliness. Wade nodded, thinking of the years he'd spent chasing work and sleeping under the open sky. You're right about that, Doc. Loneliness'll eat a man alive. At the Dobbs front gate, the doctor excused himself with a knowing smile. I'll head in, getting too old for late nights. He left them standing in the moonlight, the soft glow catching Ruby's hair. Thank you for talking me into coming tonight, Wade said. I'd almost forgotten what laughter sounded like. Ruby smiled. I'm glad you came. The town was happy to see you there. Your mother would have been too. Wade hesitated, his hand brushing the brim of his hat. Ruby, would you maybe like to go for a ride tomorrow? After church, the aspens up by Miller's Creek are turning. Thought you might enjoy seeing them. Her surprise melted into a warm smile. I'd like that very much. After dinner then, around 2, he said, feeling a rare spark of anticipation light in his chest. "Good night, Wade. Good night, Ruby." As he walked home under a blanket of stars, Wade realized it was the first time since that fateful telegram arrived that he was looking forward to the next day. By morning, he was seated once again in church, a first in nearly a decade. He sat in the same pew his family had always claimed, listening to Pastor Whitlow's sermon about renewal. "The Lord says, 'Behold, I make all things new,'" the pastor's voice rang out. "Even in our darkest hours, the promise of redemption stands waiting if we've got the courage to reach for it." Wade's gaze drifted to Ruby, sitting near the front beside her father. Sunlight poured through the stained glass window, painting her face in soft colors. She turned slightly, meeting his eyes for a brief moment, before returning her attention to the sermon. After the service, several townsfolk invited him to Sunday dinner, but he politely declined. The knowing looks from a few of the older women said more than words they'd clearly noticed where his attention had been. At 2:00 sharp, Wade pulled up to the Dobbs house in his mother's freshly polished buggy. Ruby stepped out in a forest green riding dress and matching hat with a feather tucked in the band. She looked elegant, yet perfectly suited to the trail. "You look beautiful," Wade said, helping her up. "Thank you," Ruby replied with a shy smile. "It's nice to wear something that doesn't smell like antiseptic for a change." As they rode out of town, the conversation came easily. Wade told stories of long cattle drives to Kansas, the freezing winter he'd spent in Wyoming, and the hard lessons the trail had taught him. Ruby listened intently, laughing at some tales, shaking her head at others. Then she spoke of her own life, the years in Chicago, her medical training, and her short but meaningful marriage to Tay, the brilliant young doctor who'd captured her heart. "He was dedicated," she said softly. "Too much so, maybe. Always chasing new methods, new ideas, trying to save the world one patient at a time." Wade glanced at her, the reins steady in his hands. "Sounds like someone else I know." Ruby smiled, but there was sadness in it. "Maybe, but I'm learning that sometimes healing others isn't about curing what's broken. It's about reminding them they still have something worth living for." And as the buggy rolled into the golden sea of autumn aspens, Wade couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, she was doing the same for him. When the influenza came through, Tay worked himself to the bone, Ruby Lane said softly, her voice threaded with memory. "He barely slept. I think sheer exhaustion left him too weak to fight it off." "I'm sorry," Wade Cross murmured, his tone low and sincere. "He sounds like a good man." Ruby nodded, her gaze distant. "He was. I was angry for a long time after he died, angry at God, at fate, at myself. I felt cheated of the future we were supposed to have. But with time, I came to see that loving him at all was a gift, even if it didn't last." Wade looked out over the horizon, where the gold of the aspens shimmered like fire. "My father used to say, life doesn't promise fairness, just chances. It's what we do with those chances that counts. Your father sounds like a man worth knowing," Ruby said with a small smile. "He would have liked you," Wade replied, certain of it. He had a soft spot for plain-spoken folks who worked hard and didn't scare easy. By then they'd reached the grove, an ocean of gold leaves rustling in the crisp afternoon wind. Wade helped Ruby down from the buggy, their hands lingering a moment longer than necessary. He spread a wool blanket beneath the trees and unpacked bread, cheese, apples, and a bottle of cider he'd picked up from Agnes Crow's bakery that morning. "This is breathtaking," Ruby whispered, gazing upward as sunlight filtered through the leaves. "I've passed by these hills a dozen times, but I've never stopped to really see them. My pa used to bring us here every fall," Wade said, handing her a tin cup filled with cider. He said it was the Lord's way of reminding folks that change can still be beautiful. They ate and talked as the day drifted on the light shifting through the branches above them. Wade found himself watching her, the way her eyes came alive when she spoke about nursing the compassion in her tone when she mentioned her patients. "You really love what you do," he said, almost in wonder. "I do," Ruby answered simply. "There's something sacred about standing beside people when they're most vulnerable, birth sickness, death. It's hard, but it matters. I guess that's what keeps me going." Wade nodded, thoughtful. "I wish I could say the same. I've worked hard these past 8 years, but it's always been about surviving, not living. Just moving from one job to the next." Ruby tilted her head, her eyes searching his. "And what about now, Wade? What are you looking for these days?" He hesitated, caught off guard by her honesty, but somehow it pulled the truth from him. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "Coming home made me realize how empty all that drifting was. I've seen plenty of country met good folks, but I've got nothing to show for it. No roots." Her expression softened. "Your mother asked you to stay, didn't she?" "She did," he said quietly. "And I think maybe I will. There's work to do on the land, and Copper Creek." His eyes flicked toward her. "It feels different than I remembered. Feels like something worth holding on to." Ruby's smile bloomed, slow and genuine, the faintest hint of color rising to her cheeks. "I'm glad to hear that." They lingered in the grove until the sun dipped low, then rode back toward town. The wagon wheels rolled through the gold light of evening, their silence comfortable, peaceful. When they reached her house, Ruby turned to him. "Thank you for today, Wade. It was—" She hesitated, then smiled. "It was just what I needed." "The pleasure's mine," he said honestly. "Maybe we could do it again sometime." Her eyes met his. "I'd like that very much." Standing on her porch, Wade hesitated, then asked, "Would it be improper if I called on you officially?" "Miss Lane." Ruby's lips curved in amusement. "Why, Mr. Cross, I think that would be entirely proper." Without thinking, Wade took her hand and brushed his lips lightly across her knuckles. "Until then, Ruby." As he drove home through the twilight, the air smelled of pine and wood smoke. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of hope, something alive stirring in his chest again. The weeks that followed found Wade settling into a rhythm he hadn't known since boyhood. He worked the land, mended fences, and began to take part in town life again. He joined the volunteer fire brigade, helped Jed Crow rebuild a barn struck by lightning, and started attending Pastor Whitlow's services every Sunday. And through it all, there was Ruby. Sometimes she'd visit the homestead with supplies or a warm loaf of bread. Other days he'd find excuses to stop by Hank Dobbs' office, pretending to ask after his horse's health just to see her smile. Their bond deepened slowly, naturally, two people learning to breathe again. One crisp October evening, Wade was helping Ruby close up the doctor's office after Hank had retired early with a cold. As he stacked chairs, he said, "I got a letter today, from the Circle T down in Texas. I worked there for a spell a few years back." Ruby looked up from the medicine cabinet. "Good news, I hope they're offering me a job," Wade said. "The foreman's retiring come spring. They want me to take his place." Her hands stilled, but her voice stayed even. "That's a fine opportunity." He nodded. "Good work, good pay. It'd be a steady future." "When would you have to go?" she asked quietly. "February." Wade paused, then stepped closer, his voice low. "But I'm not going to take it." Ruby's head lifted, surprise flashing across her face. "You're not?" He smiled faintly. "No. My life's here now." The relief in her eyes was unmistakable, though she tried to hide it behind composure. That's good to hear, Wade." He met her gaze fully. "No. Ruby, it's right. The town's been better off with you around these past few weeks," Ruby Lane said quietly. Wade Cross reached for her hands, his voice low but steady. It isn't the town that's kept me here, Ruby. It's you. Ruby's breath hitched. Wade. I know it's soon, he said, his thumb brushing lightly over her knuckles. We haven't known each other long, but I've never felt this way before. When I think about what's ahead, I can't picture it without you. Her eyes shimmered in the lamplight, the emotion she'd been holding back finally surfacing. I've been afraid to hope, she whispered. After Tay died, I thought that part of my heart was gone for good. I never imagined I'd find someone who'd make me feel alive again. Wade lifted a hand to her cheek, his voice a tender murmur. I'm not asking for promises tonight. I just want you to know where I stand. I'm staying here in Copper Creek because this is where I want to build a life, with you if you'll have me. Ruby leaned into his touch, her heartbeat quick against his palm. I think I've been falling in love with you since the day you rode back into town, she said softly. Something in Wade's chest broke open. He bent toward her slow enough to let her pull away, but she didn't. Their lips met tentative at first, then deepened with the kind of hunger that had nothing to do with time and everything to do with finding home again. When they finally parted, both were breathless. I love you, Ruby Lane. Wade said simply the truth in his voice as solid as the ground beneath them. Her answering smile glowed. And I love you, Wade Cross. In the stillness of Hank Dobbs's quiet office, with the lantern light flickering against the window, Wade felt the last of his restlessness dissolve. 8 years of drifting guilt and loneliness all fading, replaced by peace he hadn't thought he'd ever know again. As winter took hold of Copper Creek, Wade's courtship of Ruby became the talk of the town. Folks saw them together at Sunday services, church socials, and late suppers at the hotel dining room. Even the cold couldn't keep them from taking buggy rides through the snowy countryside. Hank Dobbs watched their growing closeness with quiet satisfaction. You've done my daughter a world of good, Wade, he told him one afternoon. I haven't seen her this happy since before she lost her husband. Meanwhile, Wade's homestead was changing too. With help from Jed Crow, Eli Boone, and a few of the ranch hands, he rebuilt the barn, added a second room to the cabin, and bought 2 milk cows along with a small flock of hens. It was clear to everyone Wade Cross was putting down roots. As Christmas drew near, the town came alive with evergreen garlands, red ribbons, and the scent of wood smoke in every chimney. Candles glowed in window panes, and children rehearsed songs for Pastor Whitlow's Christmas Eve service. For Wade, it would be his first Christmas without Mary Beth Dobbs, but also his first in years surrounded by warmth and belonging. After the evening service, he invited Ruby to his home for a quiet celebration. He'd spent 3 days cleaning and decorating the little cabin, trimming a small pine tree with ornaments his mother had kept in an old cedar chest. A roast chicken was cooking in the oven, the smell of baked apples and cinnamon filling the air. When Ruby arrived, the snow was still clinging to her cloak, her cheeks pink from the cold. Her red dress caught the glow of the firelight as she smiled. Merry Christmas, Wade, she said, handing him a small wrapped parcel. Merry Christmas, Ruby, he replied warmly, helping her with her coat. I hope you're hungry. I may have cooked enough to feed half of Copper Creek. Ruby laughed, glancing at the table he'd set with Mary Beth's best china. It looks wonderful. You've outdone yourself. They dined and talked for hours, sharing stories and laughter. Wade told her about Christmas mornings from his boyhood, the snowball fights, his father's booming laughter, his mother's biscuits hot from the stove. Ruby spoke of city holidays in Chicago before life had taught her loss. When the fire burned low, she noticed the small box sitting on the mantel. Shall we exchange gifts? She asked with a teasing smile. Wade nodded, retrieving it, and taking the parcel she offered in return. He opened hers first. Inside was a silver pocket watch polished to a shine, his initials engraved on the back. "Ruby, this is open it," she said quickly. He did, and froze. Inside the lid was a small photograph of his mother smiling softly, taken the summer before she passed. "I took it," Ruby said gently. "She was having a good day sitting in her garden telling me stories about you." Emotion closed his throat. "Thank you," he managed, his voice rough. "You don't know what this means to me." Ruby squeezed his hand. "I thought you might want to carry a piece of her with you." He drew a long breath, then handed her the box he'd been holding. "Your turn." Ruby unwrapped it carefully and gasped. Inside was a delicate gold ring set with a small diamond and 2 emeralds that caught the light like fireflies. "It belonged to my grandmother," Wade said, his voice low. "My mother saved it, hoping one day I'd find someone worthy to wear it." He took the ring, knelt before her, and looked up into her tear-filled eyes. "Ruby Lane," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "You've brought warmth and light back into my life when I thought both were gone forever. Will you marry me?" Tears spilled freely down her cheeks as she nodded. "Yes, Wade. Yes, with all my heart." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms. Their kiss was long, full of laughter and relief, and love too long denied. When they finally broke apart, Ruby looked down at her hand, dazed and smiling. "When you rode back into town for your mother's funeral, I never dreamed this was where it would lead." Wade chuckled softly. "The prodigal son and the doctor's daughter," he said. "My mother probably saw it coming before either of us did." Ruby laughed, tears still shining in her eyes. "She once told me she hoped you'd bring home a sensible woman one day. I think she worried you'd marry some saloon girl out on the trail." Wade grinned. "Guess I surprised her." Ruby touched his cheek, smiling tenderly. "No, Wade. I think you gave her exactly what she prayed for." Little did she know, Wade Cross murmured with a soft smile, that I'd find someone far more extraordinary than I ever deserved. They spent the rest of that Christmas night dreaming of the life ahead of the ranch they'd build together, of the laughter that would fill its quiet rooms. Ruby Lane would stay by her father's side to help with his medical practice as Hank Dobbs's health began to wane, while Wade would pour his heart into making the old Cross homestead thrive again. They chose a spring wedding the first Saturday in May, when the wildflowers would paint the hills in color. As midnight neared, Wade walked Ruby home through streets blanketed in snow, the town hushed under the glow of starlight. Their boots crunched softly in the frozen silence, and each exhale bloomed white in the crisp air. "I feel like I'm dreaming," Ruby said, her hand warm in his. "If someone had told me last Christmas that I'd be engaged again, I'd have called them crazy." "Life's got a way of surprising us," Wade replied, his breath curling in the night. "My father used to say, God's plans reach farther than we can see." "Your father must have been a wise man," Ruby said softly. "He would have adored you," Wade said, his voice tender. "Almost as much as I do." At her porch they lingered for one more kiss, a promise, and a prayer all at once. "Merry Christmas, my love," Wade whispered against her lips. "Merry Christmas, Wade," she breathed back. "The first of many we'll share." As he walked home beneath the vast, starlit sky, Wade felt a peace he hadn't known in years. His grief for Mary Beth Dobbs still lingered, but it no longer hollowed him. It had become part of the love that now filled his heart. Looking up at the heavens, he silently thanked his mother for guiding him home. To Ruby. Spring arrived in Copper Creek in a riot of color. Wildflowers blanketed the hills, and the town hummed with excitement for the wedding of Wade Cross and Ruby Lane. Women sewed ribbons and baked pies. Men lent wagons and built benches for the churchyard. Children gathered armfuls of flowers for decorations. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear. A warm breeze carried the scent of pine lilac and freshly turned earth. In a small room behind the church, Wade adjusted his string tie for the third time. "You look fine," said Clyde May, who stood nearby in his Sunday best, acting as Wade's witness. "Better than fine," he added with a grin. "Ruby's a lucky woman." Wade shook his head with quiet certainty. "No, Clyde, I'm the lucky one." Across town, Ruby stood before a mirror as Evelyn Hart and Agnes Crow fussed over her gown and ivory satin dress trimmed with lace, simple yet graceful, just like her. "You look beautiful, dear," Agnes said, adjusting the wreath of wildflowers nestled in Ruby's hair. "Wade won't know what hit him," Evelyn teased. A gentle knock came at the door. "It's time, Hank Dobbs," said his voice rough with emotion. "The church is packed to the rafters, and that young fella of yours looks like he might wear a hole in the floor waitin'." Ruby took her father's arm, her pulse quickening. "I'm ready, Father." The church overflowed with neighbors and ranchers from miles around. As Ruby walked down the aisle, sunlight poured through the windows, glinting off her hair. Her gaze met Wade's, and the rest of the world faded away. He stood tall at the altar, his dark hair combed back, his eyes bright with love and awe. Pastor Whitlow spoke the vows in a voice that carried clear and steady words of faith, love, and forever. When Wade slipped the gold ring beside Ruby's engagement band, his hands didn't shake, and his voice was firm. "With the authority vested in me," Pastor Whitlow declared, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. You may kiss your bride, Wade." Wade didn't hesitate. He drew Ruby into his arms and kissed her slow, sure, full of promise. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers as they turned to face the congregation, Mr. and Mrs. Wade Cross. The celebration filled the town square that evening. Tables groaned under platters of food from every household, and lanterns hung from tree branches like fireflies. The fiddlers played boots, stomped laughter rose into the night. Alina Hart clasped Wade's arm affectionately. "Your mother would be so proud. She always said you'd come home when your heart was ready." "I think she had a hand in this," Wade said, looking at Ruby across the crowd, even from beyond. As twilight melted into night, Wade helped Ruby into a buggy, draped with ribbons and wildflowers. "Ready to go home?" "Mrs. Cross," he asked, smiling. "I've never been more ready for anything," she replied, her voice trembling with joy. The ride to the homestead was quiet, wrapped in the hum of crickets and the glow of the moon. When they arrived, Wade lifted her into his arms, carrying her over the threshold. "Welcome home," he said softly. Ruby looked around, eyes wide with wonder. The cabin glowed with candlelight. Fresh flowers filled every corner, and rose petals were scattered across the bed. "Wade, it's beautiful. Not half as beautiful as you," he murmured, pulling her close. "I still can't believe you're my wife." "Believe it," she whispered, tracing her fingers along his jaw. "I love you, Wade Cross. And I love you, Ruby Cross," he answered, his voice thick with emotion, before kissing her again, deeply, completely. Later, as they lay together in the stillness of their first night, as husband and wife, Ruby's head rested against his chest. The fire crackled softly, and outside a coyote called in the distance. "What are you thinking?" she asked drowsily. Wade brushed his fingers through her hair, smiling into the dark. "That life's funny," he said. "It took losing everything to bring me home to what I needed most." Ruby lifted her head to meet his gaze. "And what's that?" He kissed her forehead. You. I've been thinking. Wade Cross murmured, his voice low and thoughtful. Sometimes a man's got to lose himself completely before he can truly find where he belongs. Ruby Lane lifted herself onto one elbow, her loose hair brushing against his chest. And have you found where you belong, Wade? He drew her close again, his heart so full it almost hurt. Yes, my love, he whispered against her hair. I'm finally home. 5 years later, Wade stood on the wide porch of the expanded Cross homestead, sunlight spilling over the valley. From where he stood, he could see Ruby out by the chicken coop, gently guiding their 4-year-old twin daughters through their morning chore. Careful girls, Ruby called her tone both patient and warm. Remember what Papa said, approach from the side, not the back. I am being careful, Mama said, little Nora Callahan, her brow furrowed in serious concentration. I got 2 eggs! Wyatt. Callahan shouted proudly, holding them high for all to see. Wade chuckled, watching the scene unfold with quiet pride. The sight of Ruby and their daughters, hazel eyes sparkling dark curls wild in the wind, filled him with a sense of peace he hadn't known in his younger years. The homestead had grown under his and Ruby's care. What had once been a lonely cabin now thrived as a modest ranch, with sturdy fences, healthy cattle, and gardens that yielded more each season. Ruby still assisted her father, Hank Dobbs, with his medical practice, though a young doctor from Denver had recently joined them to ease Hank's workload as age began to slow him down. Life in Copper Creek had been kind to them. The town itself was changing too. There was a new schoolhouse, a brick bank, and talk of building a small hospital. Wade had become a respected figure in the community, serving on the town council and leading the annual cattle drive east to the railway station. As he leaned against the porch post watching his family, Wade thought back to the man he'd been when he first rode into Copper Creek, dust-covered, grief-stricken, running from ghosts. The years since had been full of work, of laughter, of challenges they'd weathered together, droughts, lean seasons, Ruby's difficult twin pregnancy that nearly took her life. But through it all, their love had only deepened, rooted like the oaks behind the barn. Ruby looked up and caught his gaze across the yard. Her smile, still as radiant as that first evening she'd stood on his porch, warmed him straight through. She said something to the girls, and both twins turned and sprinted toward him, their tiny baskets clutched tightly. "Papa! Papa!" they cried in unison. "We helped Mama. We're good egg gatherers." Wade crouched down, sweeping them into his arms, laughing. "The best in all of Colorado, I'd say." Ruby followed her steps slower now, one hand resting protectively over the gentle swell of her belly. "They're becoming quite the farmhands," she said fondly, "though I think Wyatt's more interested in studying the hens than collecting the eggs." "I want to be a doctor like Grandpa," and Mama Wyatt declared solemnly. "And I'm going to ride horses like Papa," Nora added quickly. Wade laughed, lifting both girls off the ground. "You can be anything you want, my little ones. The world's big enough for both a doctor and a cowgirl." As they went inside for supper, Wade caught Ruby's hand, drawing her close for a brief, quiet moment. "Have I told you today how much I love you?" he murmured. Only twice she teased, her lips curving. "You're falling behind, Mr. Cross." He kissed her softly, his thumb brushing her cheek. "I love you, Ruby Cross." More with every sunrise. Her eyes glowed with that same fierce tenderness that had carried them through every trial. "And I love you, Wade. Coming to Copper Creek was the best decision my father ever made." Wade smiled. "Coming home was the best decision I ever made, though I didn't know it at the time." Later that night, after the girls were asleep, Wade and Ruby sat together on the porch swing. The stars stretched endless above them, the cool air scented with pine and the faint smoke of distant chimneys. Ruby's head rested on his shoulder, her fingers intertwined with his. "Do you ever wonder?" she asked softly. "What might have happened if you hadn't come back for your mother's funeral?" Wade thought for a long moment. Sometimes he said finally, "Maybe I'd still be drifting from one ranch to the next, never staying long enough to build anything real. Or maybe I'd have taken that foreman's job down in Texas." He turned to her, his voice low but sure. "But then I'd have missed you and everything we've built together." Ruby lifted her face and kissed him gently. "I'm glad you came home, Wade Cross." He smiled, holding her closer as the night deepened around them. "So am I, sweetheart. So am I." In the quiet of that warm spring evening, with the woman he loved resting against him and their children sleeping peacefully inside, Wade offered a silent prayer of thanks. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you.